The chuppah is one of the core ritual elements of a Jewish wedding. The happy couple stands under a cloth, oftentimes a family talit, suspended by its four corners from poles or posts, which are sometimes embellished with flowers and greenery. I'm sure that most of us in this room who have been married under a chuppah remember exactly what it looked like. It's always a simple structure that is open on all sides, which we are taught is an homage to the tent of Abraham and Sarah, who sat under a similar shelter, perpetually prepared to welcome any guests who wandered by, eagerly awaiting their arrival. This is the context in which Abraham and Sarah welcomed the messengers of God, who, after being offered delicacies prepared by Sarah, promised the couple that Sarah will bear a child in her old age. If you can imagine that scene, it sounds like a pastoral ideal. Fresh air, righteous and generous behavior, and domestic tranquility. Until that is, we remember that Abraham was in the open air recovering from his circumcision at 99 years old, and that by this point, he and Sarah had been through decades of infertility. If you didn't see that twist coming, you should have. Even before Abraham and Sarah are told, Lech Lecha, to go to the place that God will show them, we are introduced to that hardship that defines their story. Genesis chapter 11, verses 29 and 30, introduces Abraham and Sarah for the first time. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. As indicated by this very first mention of Abraham and Sarah in the Torah, no matter how beloved they were by God, their lives were not going to be easy. Pirkei Avot, the renowned collection of ethics and theology found in the Mishnah, teaches us that in fact, Abraham withstood 10 different tests or trials over the course of his life. A modern commentary written by scholar Nama Eldar points out that Sarah faced these trials on equal footing with her husband. Pirkei Avot doesn't enumerate them, so many commentators develop their own lists, with the resulting sum total indicating that Abraham and Sarah had to overcome many, many more than the 10 challenges suggested by the Mishnah. We may be familiar with some of these hardships in their different forms. They came by way of divine intervention, self-inflicted wounds, and interpersonal conflict. The instances of famine Abraham and Sarah faced, the family tensions resulting from the decision to have Abraham father a child with his concubine Hagar, Sarah being taken from Abraham's side by 2 foreign rulers due to her beauty. And of course, there is consensus that the final test was by far the most difficult. Another command to go, this time not to a foreign land, but rather to a mountaintop where Abraham will sacrifice his beloved son Isaac to God. I've been thinking a lot about this teaching from Pirkei Avot this year. Having completed 6 years on this bima, my love of this job and this community is stronger than ever. And I'm so proud of the growth and success that we have shared. And yet we have also faced myriad trials of our own in that time. Less than 6 months after I took over the pulpit, COVID shut the world down. The unrest and reckoning with societal injustice after the murder of George Floyd led into a contentious and ugly election in 2020. Just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal after the pandemic, the tragedy of October 7th occurred, and amidst the past 2 years of war and suffering, our Jewish community and its values have been shaken, and anti-Semitism has surged. 2024 brought an uglier and even more contentious election season, and it feels like the enmity and divisions that we all bemoan are only growing. This year, for the first time, I have wondered if being a community leader will mean always being in crisis management mode, always feeling like I and we are being tested. It's not a good feeling. I'm not sure how Abraham and Sarah dealt with it. I refuse to accept that being tested was or is a sign of God's love or God's need to have anyone prove themselves. That is frankly not the God I would ever think to turn to in a difficult moment. Nor do I believe that God has anything to do with many of the challenges we face. It's not fair to blame God for messes of our own devising. So where did that leave Abraham and Sarah? And where does that leave us? On a journey. The series of trials starts and ends with Lech Lecha, God directing Abraham and Sarah to go, first to an unknown land together, and concluding with Abraham's journey with Isaac to an unknown mountaintop. For those of us who know the Torah stories well, Lech Lecha doesn't need a precise translation. We know it means go or go forth, but the syntax is unusual. In neither modern or biblical Hebrew would you ever tell anyone to Lech Lecha to the store. Scholar and translator Everett Fox explains it as go you forth, which has some dramatic flair, but I prefer the explanation of a 19th century Hasidic master, Rabbi Mordechai Lehner, who is known as the Mehashiloach, or the name that I prefer, the Ishbitzer, from the name of his hometown in Poland. The Ishbitzer explains that when God says, Lech Lecha, God is directing Abraham and Sarah to go to themselves. Who Abraham and Sarah become, the ancestors of great nations, is forged in their journey and by the adversity that they face. We don't know exactly what made these two special initially, why God chose them and told them to set out. We do know that being chosen did not ease their path. Had the Torah's story simply recounted that God chose Abraham and Sarah, led them to a promised land where they had a son and raised him into their old age and lived happily ever after, it's unlikely that story would have lasted thousands of years and become the bedrock of our faith. As scholar Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg writes, there emerges a sense of the journey itself, the travail, as essential to the birth and growth of self. Facing challenges invites us to learn about ourselves. And we have learned a lot and continue to learn. Over the last 6 years, we learned how to use modern technology to adapt age-old traditions to stave off social isolation. We learned to make personal sacrifices to protect the vulnerable among us and keep our community strong and safe. We are still learning what our political red lines are and how we choose to respond and speak up when those lines are crossed. We continue to learn new ways to relate to Israel and to Palestinians. Those relationships may be exponentially more complex than they were a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, but they are often much more developed and nuanced, rather than something we assume or take for granted. And unfortunately, we need to keep learning and teaching others how to respond to anti-Semitism and to articulate why Jewish life, community, and practice are worth fighting for and standing up for. We learn the importance of holding on to hope even when things feel hopeless. I am not an overly optimistic person by nature, and optimism feels like it can be in especially short supply right now. But as Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former Chief Rabbi of England, may his memory be for a blessing, teaches, optimism and hope are not the same thing. According to Rabbi Sacks, optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. The Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book. It is, however, one of the great literatures of hope. A journey of lech lecha, of going forth to yourself, is the Torah teaching us what it is to face the world with hope. It is an active, courageous choice, one that will change the world for the better. Hope informed Abraham and Sarah's outlook as they sat bruised in an open tent, awaiting visitors, and hope must guide us as we sit, sometimes fatigued, in a synagogue in Newburyport looking for answers. We face hardship and we learn from it. And if our legacy as the children of Abraham and Sarah is to be a people who face numerous challenges that test us again and again, then part of that self-same legacy is to hold on to and strengthen our sense of hope together and use it to create the legacy of a better world. Shana Tova.